Right, so we've got a lot of people coming in, which is fantastic. We're going to hold fire before we start for a couple of minutes just to make sure, because quite a lot of people have registered, and we'll give them a chance. And then if they're really late, then it's down to them. Now, I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me. Is that safe? How can we know?
We can't know. We
No.
can't know. This is the fear of a webinar.
Oh well.
But we can hear you, so
Fantastic. Right. Well, it's 11:03. Let's kick off at 11:05, and take it from there. But saying that, we've got a fair number of people so far.
excellent.
Amazing.
Excellent. We should do like HubSpot webinars. They play 80s music videos as people are joining the webinar. That's for the European partner webinars that they do.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, a mixture of 80s Europop. That's just amazing.
Well, I mean, it's your screen we're staring at, so if you want to switch it across to
a little bit take on me. Oh, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? I've planted the thought in everybody's head now. It's almost the same as actually playing the YouTube video.
Yeah, it's not far off. It's going to be stuck in my head for a while.
I think it's a cultural reference, Kimberly, that's slightly before your time, but it's bang on for Oz and I, unfortunately.
Yeah.
No worries. We were listening at home a lot to CDs still, so.
Well, this was definitely a vinyl song.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I have some laying here, so.
Excellent.
Right. Do you know what? I mean, it's 11:04. We've got a fair few people here. I think we should probably just crack on and get on with it. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2024 Rubber Cheese Annual Visitor Attraction Website Survey Report Launch Webinar. Every time I have to say that, I understand why Gartner went with Magic Quadrant. We really need to come up with a cool name for it. So any suggestions, please let me know. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Oz from Rubber Cheese, and I'm going to be chairing today, which basically means that you have to listen to me at the beginning and the end. We're gonna have a fairly fast and furious look at the highlights of the data we've gathered in the report this year, and some of the implications of that data for the visitor attraction sector as a whole. As we've been doing this for a few years now, we're also going to try and identify some of the trends that we've seen develop over time.
Yep.
And maybe look at how they might change over the future. We are recording today's session, and we'll email a recording of it to everybody that has registered. So if you need to leave early, don't worry about that. You'll still get the whole thing emailed through to you. And at the end of the session, we'll email you a link to view the full report, because we just don't have time to go through the whole thing today. If at any point in the future you've got any questions about it, or you want to talk about it in any more detail, how it applies to you and your attraction specifically, drop me an email, oz@rubbercheese.com, or connect on LinkedIn. There will be time, hopefully, for a bit of Q&A at the end. So by all means, stick a question in the Q&A tab, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And I'll do my best to make sure that either Paul or Kimberly answer. And with that, let me introduce Paul and Kimberly. Paul Marden is our CEO at Rubber Cheese. He's going to be presenting the lion's share of today. And Kimberly Prenger is a revenue optimization specialist from Convius. And on that note, I just want to thank Convius, a massive thank you to everyone at Convius for coming on board as a sponsor for the third year running and making this digital report possible. It's because of your help and support that we've been able to do this and give it away completely free to the sector as a whole. So thank you. We really, really appreciate your support.
No worries. Thank you so much for this awesome report, and looking forward to the webinar.
And with that, over to you, Paul.
Okay, should we get started then? Like every good presentation, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you before I start. So, look, the general themes around today's report is about testings. We think it's really important that you test your website in lots of different ways. And interestingly, this year's data shows that in some ways your website may be worse than you think it is. And so your instinct about how well you're performing really does need to be supported with real world testing of where you actually are. So let's start with CO2 emissions of the website. It's really important to test the sustainability of your website. Most attractions aren't doing this, and most attraction websites are worse than the global average. So we'll swing back to all of these points and go into them in much more depth, but that's an important place to start. Similarly, your website is probably slower than you think it is, and that can hurt your SEO, your conversion rates, and your sustainability. So get in there, test it, get your digital team to be in there testing it, so that you can actually see the numbers and see how the website is performing, rather than going on instinct and gut feel. Some more positive areas that can improve your conversion rate. This year, we've seen that online discounting to incentivize people to use their website can have a positive impact on your sales and your conversion rates. So that's something that is well worth experimenting with. And lastly, this is very much a repeat from last year. Try to ask less of your visitors when they're buying, because when you do that, it can increase your sales. And this year, we know that it can reduce your CO2 emissions as well. So these are points I'm going to come back to in more detail. And Oz and Kimberly are going to join me along the way, because sometimes there's some opposing views that we can share, and some war stories and thoughts. This year's survey saw submissions from over 100 attractions from around the globe. Interestingly, 26% of respondents have submitted into the survey in previous years, and predominantly our respondents are theme parks, castles, forts, zoos, safari parks, and historic houses. Although we do have a really good spread across other types of attractions as well. Interestingly, this year, we've supplemented the survey data that we've gathered with data that we've gathered from over 1,000 global attractions. And what we've done in these cases is gather as much externally observable data as we can to supplement and improve our understanding of the sector. This has change the profile of the attractions that we have in our data set now and that we'll be reporting on this year. And they kind of they fall into what I would call three types of attraction. We've got the single site attractions that submit their data to the survey individually. They will have one website for one physical attraction. That's a large group. There is another large group of attractions. They tend to be small groups, and an example of this would be often there will be a charity that has been spun out from a local authority to run a group of museums in a local area. Or another example of these small groups is where there's a small group of museums of what we would describe as of national importance. And in these cases, some have individual attractions per website, but most have a single shared site across all of the attractions within their small group. There's then larger multinational groups that operate many attractions. Often a single site will serve multiple attractions within a brand. So all of the aquariums within that group may share a single website, but that's not exclusive. Yeah, there are many groups where each individual attraction will have its own website. And then there are a couple of outliers, some very large operators within the data set. We've got two of these that run between 300 and 600 attractions, each from a single website. And it's because of this nature of the number of attractions that are served within an individual website and the size and the budgets that are available to those attractions, that we've seen very much two different views of the data. When we exclude these large multi-site operators, or when we include them in the data set, and they tell us very different stories. And so what we've presented this year within the report is the ability for you to be able to toggle between those two data sets. So if you happen to be a small operator, then you can see what other smaller operators are doing. If you're a large multi-site, then you can include those into the data set and see how they change the data or skew the data depending on your point of view. So what does our average, Joe average attraction look like? We see that middle of the road attraction has around 30,000 website visitors per month. They don't use personalization on their website, although in many cases they do have the technology built into their website to do it. They're just not using it. 20% of visitors add something to their basket and 7% go on to buy. They probably have a sustainability policy, but their website is probably a grade F for its CO2 emissions, which is worse than the global average. And 80% of visitors use mobile, but they probably don't test the mobile experience of their site. So let's drill into some of that. We've looked at the Joe average. Now let's drill into individual areas of the site. Okay. Spend on website running costs is up this year, with about 40% of attractions spending between 5 and 35K per year. That compares to 25% of attractions last year. And most attractions spend between 0 and 10% of their gross profit on marketing. We know that technology touches all parts of the customer experience, and you'll all be using a variety of tools to market, to sell, and to service your customers. And this is an area of the survey that we get asked about throughout the year when we're visiting people. People are often really interested in what are other attractions like me doing for CRM or for their content management system. But we've historically found it quite challenging to gather the data. We've improved the questioning this year, but we've also got a large amount of data from the cohort of data that we've gathered from the 1,000-odd global websites. And because of that, we've seen some really big changes, and the impact of the multi-site operators in this area is really quite significant. If we look at ticketing technologies, this year, when we include the multi-site operators and look at the 1,000+ attractions in the survey, we see that most are using Accesso. But if we exclude the multi-site operators, then we see Tessitura, Fusemetrics, and Digitickets all are roughly around the same amount of usage in the survey group.
Can I just jump in with a quick point here, that one of the things we've tried really hard to do is reduce the amount of times that the answer was other. And yet in this graph, it's clear that quite a lot of it is other, but what the graph represents is lots of small slices rather than one big slice that we don't know.
Yeah, there's a long tail to this graph, isn't there?
There's
lots of people, there's lots of respondents where they're the only respondent using that particular tool, and you ended up with lots of tiny salami slices in the.
It's there to make the graph readable, not because a quarter of the sites haven't said. So when we say Tessitura, Fusemetrics, Digitickets, that's actually genuine.
Yeah. When we look at content management systems, again, looking at the multi-sites, we see Bloomreach being by far the most popular content management system. That's a little, it's a niche player, and it's really strong in personalization and customer data platforms. And that is possibly why we see it being the most popular when you include the big multinational multi-site operators. When we take those out of the equation and look at the smaller operators, we see WordPress, Umbraco, and Adobe Experience Manager accounting for about 80% of the sites in our survey. For CRM, we see that Salesforce accounts for about 45% of our CRM usage. I went too far there. And when we switch to e-commerce, looking at online gift shops, we see that Magento is the most popular for the larger operators. But when you drill down to take the multi-site operators out of the equation, you see that Shopify is by far the most popular e-commerce platform. That's what we saw in the survey last year, although this year we're seeing it with a much, much higher percentage. This aligns really well with some research that the Association for Cultural Enterprises have done this year, where they saw exactly this picture, that most attractions are using Shopify because it's really quick to get up and running. And easy to operate, but some of the larger operators are using tools like Magento because of the power that those tools give to you. Oz, have you got some thoughts on this so far?
Yeah, I mean, we were obviously, this is something as an agency that builds websites. This is something that specifically interests us, and understanding the why behind it. Obviously, there's been a bit of a rise, or at least it would appear to be a rise in e-commerce on visitor attraction websites, people taking their gift shop and making it available online. And Shopify really very clearly gives you a way of getting that up quickly. And for an agency like us, it's really quite simple and quite an easy job to make a Shopify shop look just like the website that you've got. So I think just like most of these, the call to action, if there is one, is talk to us, because there's a lot of information here. We can't put it all forward in a presentation. However much we'd love to, we'd be here for weeks. But if this is something that is on your to-do list for the next quarter, or maybe over the winter, give us a shout. Let's have a chat, and we'll drill into the data in a little bit more detail. No obligation, obviously. We just, we can make it easier for you, then that's what we'd love to do.
Thank you. Let's switch to the websites themselves and how well they're performing. When we look at where do most attractions get their website traffic from, we see that organic search is by far the biggest source. Interestingly, email marketing performs the worst. And we know that a lot of attractions are prioritizing gathering that future email marketing data in their sales funnel over actually completing the sale. What we don't know from the traffic sources is which is the most effective, which gives you the conversion rate, which gets you people engaging and coming back and buying. But it's certainly food for thought for you to think about that and experiment with that, making sure that you've got tracking data through the entire buying journey, so that you can track the source of the traffic to your website and what the effectiveness of that traffic source is. And you can test your hypothesis. You might start from the position of feeling like email marketing is actually driving lots of the sales on your site. Well, test it and find out. It turns out it's actually quite small percentage of the conversions that you've got. Maybe gathering that data, gathering that permission to market to people during the sales cycle is not necessarily the right thing for you to do. From a positive perspective, we know that this year a lot more people are conducting user testing on their websites, which we're really pleased about. However, we're still seeing a small minority of attractions actually undertaking user testing on mobile, even though most attractions get most of their traffic on mobile. This is a point I'm sure we'll come back to and talk more about. In this year's survey, we saw that more than 40% of attractions said that their website loaded in under 2 seconds. This is way faster than most sites, including Amazon. And so, how do I say this delicately? I was a little bit skeptical of that answer. So we decided to do some lab testing, and actually we did some performance testing of all of the sites that were in our data set to work out how long does it take from somebody typing in the address to the site actually becoming interactive and usable. This is a measure that Google calls time to interactive. And for the majority of sites in the survey, it took between 10 and 20 seconds to load the page up, the homepage, and become interactive. Now, this time to interactive measure that Google has is super important because it impacts your SEO rankings, it impacts your conversion rates. The shorter the time to interactive, the quicker people can get on and do the thing that they want to do, and they're less likely to drop off. But critically, also time to interactive is a measure that impacts the CO2 emissions of your website. The longer it takes to process and get a site ready to be used, the more likely people are going to drop off, and all of that CO2 that you consumed was wasted because it never resulted in somebody actually engaging in your site. Why is it so different from the published? Why is it that people feel that their sites are better than they actually are? It could be that what you're each individually testing is not what we're testing, or what your end users are testing. But this is an area where we want to come back to this in future years and see how we can improve the wording to get people to gather the data perhaps in a more effective way. We talked about engagement last year, but the engagement rate measure that Google had introduced in Google Analytics 4 was very new last year, and we've seen quite a shift where the engagement rate is now much higher this year than it was last year. I tend to think that's because people are understanding the measure more, they know how to gather it better. Perhaps the wording that we used in our questions was a little bit better this year, but that's a really positive outcome that engagement is improving. We also asked people about personalization, and definitely, but this was another reworded question, but definitely more people are reporting that their websites offer personalized content than in previous years. It's more than doubled. But, you know, what we found interesting this year was when we looked at the number of people that are offering personalization and the data that they gave us about the website technologies that they were using, we found that 70% of the respondents that weren't using personalization were actually using a content management system that was capable of providing personalization. So this is something that you've got the technology at your disposal, but either you don't know how to use it, you don't have the time to be able to use it, you've not been trained how to use it, but the feature is there. And we know that personalization can definitely improve outcomes on the website. So this is something that we think that a lot of people should go back and look at. What tooling are you using? Talk to your web team about, is this something that they could introduce for relatively little effort? Because it could be a big win for you because you've already invested a lot of the money in the technology that's needed to achieve it. Big pat on the back. Lots more respondents this year are frequently updating their websites, which is a really important thing to do. Google really likes websites that are updated on a very regular basis. And this year, 85% of you are actually updating regularly compared to 62% last year. So big round of applause for that. Oz. Thoughts?
Yeah, there are a few things that I'd like to just dive in there and say. On updates specifically, 85% people doing really regular content updates, which is fantastic. But that does mean that 15% of attractions that submitted their data aren't. So, you know, just make sure that you aren't one of those 15%, because this is something that's relatively easy to do and has a big impact. The other thing I think is just to quickly talk about personalization, that we tend, when we talk to people about personalization, it feels like a really big and scary thing to start doing. And as Paul's just pointed out, you've already done the biggest, scariest bit of it in the vast majority of cases. So perhaps it's not as big a deal as you think. And we all know that if we're sending emails out to people, we personalize them as much as we can, because you get a better result, you get better engagement and better ROI from there. And you can do exactly that with your website. And it may be a lot easier than you think. It may be a higher percentage thing to do, and it may be a quicker win than you think. So again, test, have a look, talk to us, talk to, if it's not us, talk to whoever it is that's looking after your site, and see, because you might be surprised at how easy it is.
Yeah, and I think these are all basic measures that you could include in a KPI dashboard about your digital marketing activities.
Well, yes, yeah, absolutely. Especially things like updates, without a doubt. If you aren't already tracking this, then yeah, do it. If you're having regular marketing meetings, then maybe these are specific things that you need to be looking at and measuring and keeping a close eye on tracking.
Yeah, and then benchmarking yourself against the data that we've got in here. So, okay, let's move on. Once you've got people on the website, you want people to achieve the goals that you set out for them. Let's look now at some of the steps that you can take to improve conversion rates and the average order value. So this year we know that for the average attraction, 20% of visitors add a ticket to their cart, and 40% go on to make a purchase. But there's quite a lot of hoops that we make people go through to achieve that. In last year's report, 75% of sites took more than 5 clicks to check out. That's true this year, but actually the average is 7 clicks overall. We know that in last year's report, the cost of the average attraction, adding in unnecessary steps and unnecessary data in their checkout, is around £250,000 a year. But it does impact your sustainability as well, by wasting CO2, by making people jump through hoops that they don't need to jump through. So looking to reduce those number of steps can be a really helpful thing to do.
Before you move on, that's something that we know that Kimberly has a slightly different point of view on. So can we drop back to the last slide?
Well, so I've got that one on this one. So we'll put that. Okay. Let's just talk about what do I mean by unnecessary data and steps. I think if you trim everything down to the bare minimum to operate the transaction, you're talking about finding out what tickets somebody wants, finding a way of getting the tickets to them, and gathering basic card information, which could be as simple as an Apple Pay or Google Pay authentication, where you don't even need to gather any data because it's all given to you. So you can reduce this to a really small number of steps. But Kimberly, you've got some thoughts on this, that maybe I'm advocating something that could be a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. Because the biggest lines I agree with, for sure. And when we were doing this dry run, at the end of the dry run, I raised a point that we had a partner, they saw your report and they thought, wow, 8K per step. Let's delete all steps. And of course, that's not something we would like to do. Reason being, if you delete all steps, then you have such an overload in your first step. You then need to have all your tickets, all events, all information maybe already in there, all your upsells. That's going to increase your choice overload for people. I'm not sure if people here already saw a few of our other webinars where we speak about the gem experiments, where people had to choose between 15 kinds of gems or 6 kinds of gems and which one sold more. And the ones where 6 were presented, then people are going to buy. So although I agree that you don't have to ask people their blood type almost, or because of course some people are trying to ask a lot about you. But I do want to underline that it's really important to make sure you don't have a choice overload for your people on the website. And you have kind of the progressive disclosure. So that's that you make sure that everything is step by step, making it a little bit more funneled. And and making sure all the information that people need is there. So please don't start deleting after this webinar everything, so you have one step. Make sure that still everything is clear and is as customer friendly as it possibly can be.
I completely agree. I think it's got to be about a simplification exercise. And in many cases, you know, there's debatable points around where do you think something is necessary versus something that is optional. And there were some debatable points, but as you say, you don't need someone's blood type. Do you absolutely need to know where somebody found out about your attraction? It's a nice thing to know, but it doesn't aid the transaction. And if you make that a mandatory step in the checkout, then that could be prejudicial. So in my wish to strip things back to its simplest form, it's not just about cutting out steps and asking 25 questions on one step. It's got to be about a rational approach. It's got to be an experimental approach as well. I think you can't cut these things and assume it will have the expected outcome for you, because every attraction is different. And a lot of what we find in the survey is broad brushstrokes, and you need to experiment and find out what's relevant to your customers, your attraction.
100%.
Yeah, and I think I just at that point want to draw back to what we said earlier on about traffic sources, is that a lot of the time the extra steps that people are putting in is so that we can target them again later, which is great. But if targeting them again later means that you actually lose them now, then you don't have anybody later either. So there's definitely a trade-off. But as Paul said, you know, it's going to be different for every attraction. So
yeah, your mileage may vary. So
yeah,
this is also one of the reasons why we have something called an after payment form. So then you're making sure that at first you have your purchase in, and later on you maybe ask some questions. So
yeah,
of course, getting the purchase in is the most important thing. And then you can maybe ask like, hey, how did you come to this website? Or, hey, what's your address so we can send something to you, whatever. But
yeah,
let's make sure it's as easy as possible.
yeah,
brilliant. Another interesting thing that we found this year, we asked people about what they do to upsell and cross-sell on their website, and we found that discounting was an effective measure to increase the conversion rate on sites for the average attraction. We saw a substantial increase to the number of people adding stuff to their cart, and an overall increase in the end conversion rate for those attractions that offered discounting on their website to incentivize the use of the website. But this is not universal. You know, there were people in the response set for whom the discounting did not have an overall positive impact. So again, give it a try, because there's a multi-site operator that I met at the Visitor Attraction Conference a couple of weeks ago who was saying this was absolutely something that they did this year, and it absolutely increased their revenue as a result of it. But you don't know how this is going to impact you, so you have to test it before you go all in on it. Let's switch to sustainability. This is an important new area of the report this year. We know that most attractions, and Oz and I have talked about this on Skip the Queue, most attractions have a sustainability policy, and many are taking steps to improve the sustainability posture of their website. But interestingly, most aren't testing the CO2 emissions of their website. It could be because people don't know how to, they don't know how easy it is. It might be because they don't think it's a substantial impact on the overall CO2 emissions of the attraction as a whole. We think that this is a really important element. And so what we've done this year is we have benchmarked every attraction within our database. We have undertaken a sustainability audit using a couple of tools called Website Carbon and EcoGrader to understand what the average attraction looks like. And you can see in the graph that I've got here, by far the majority of attraction websites score an F, which is worse than the global average websites. There are some exceptions, don't get me wrong. And many of the exceptions have been doing things to actively manage the CO2 emissions. There's a really positive story that most attractions are using green hosting, which is an important method of reducing CO2 emissions. But it's not the only thing you can do. Don't think that just because you've got green hosting, you don't have to do anything to reduce the file size of your website, the amount of download, the amount of kilobytes downloaded over the wire to somebody's mobile phone when they actually access your site. Green hosting is not, it's not a panacea. But the good news is there are really simple things that you can do, and we've found that this just recently with one of the sites that we work with, we got them from an F up to a C with only a day and a half's worth of junior developer time. It was really not an expensive and complex thing that needed work. We were able to bite off some quick wins and achieve a substantial improvement in the CO2 performance of their site.
I think just to put a little bit of context on that as well, because obviously saying from F to C doesn't really give us any idea of what difference that's made to the world. That's the equivalent of driving a petrol car from the south of England to Beijing. And it's removed that amount of carbon from the atmosphere for the sake of a day and a half's worth of work.
Yeah. They are really, really quick, simple wins that you can achieve here that will make a big difference. But what if you don't know where to start? Oz has the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are two things that you need to do. The first is if you did submit your data to the survey and you'd like to know what your specific site looks like when we did this testing, get in touch, let us know, we'll send you that. But the other thing is even if you didn't do that and you'd like to look at maybe improving the situation, then join our sustainability action group. We're all really new on this journey. And I think that we had a guest on Skip the Queue a little while ago, Polly, I think it was, that was talking about the fact that the most important thing is just to be upfront and honest about where you are, because unless you do that, you can't improve. So effectively, what we're trying to do is create a mastermind group of people who want to improve things, and we're all going to work together to do that in the best way possible, keep each other accountable, and actually make sure it happens. So yeah, again, drop me an email, oz@robertcheese.com, if you want to be part of it. And we'll get you on board.
Yeah, this is all beta testing that we're going to be doing here, so it'll all be learning at the same time, and it's free for attractions to join, so please just get in touch. The second major area of new research this year was in the use of AI by attractions to improve the visitor experience. We know that Oz and I talked a lot about this, about being in a tech bubble where we just assume everyone is using AI tools, but actually only half of the attractions were using a tool like ChatGPT or Bard to improve their marketing or their communications internally. There were a few attractions that were doing something which I think I would describe as more innovative uses of AI, like AI-powered workforce management tools, AI-powered CRM tools. But Kimberly, you've got some ways in which Convius is using AI at the moment to try to improve the visitor experience.
Yes, for sure. Well, we actually have two ways we're right now using artificial intelligence. One of them is our new chatbot via WhatsApp. But today we're going to talk about dynamic pricing a little bit more, because that ties really well into what you just said about the discounting. A lot of people may know dynamic pricing in a negative way. Let's be honest with each other. We're all thinking about aviation, where it's a holiday and you need to pay way more than you thought you would need to pay for those tickets to Ibiza or wherever you're going. But that's not everything that dynamic pricing is. Again, when we were discussing this webinar during our dry run, I also spoke to Oz and Paul about you have to really communicate dynamic pricing in a right way. But before I get into that, is what we are doing at Convius. We don't have one algorithm that would fit you all. We actually have more algorithms where we put artificial intelligence into, because we're not a one size fits all. So not every venue is the same. That's also why I'm really happy with this year's report, where we have the smaller versus the larger parks/venues. But what we're doing into our algorithm is, for example, weather, holidays. Is it rainy or sunny in the neighborhood? What are the neighboring countries doing? Do they have any holidays right now going on? Which kind of the day is it? Which week is it? So everything, all the data that we have, we put it into this cool algorithm, and we can tune it, of course, on every partner specific. And what we get then is dynamic pricing focused on how much tickets are you selling, what is going on, and we're trying to make sure that then, of course, the prices are as good as they can be, so that people at the end of the day buy a little bit more, because we all like discounts, huh? I'm not sure you guys, but I like shopping, so I also like discounts. And one of the ways with dynamic pricing is, for sure people like the prices because you set a barrier, an upper limit, a lower limit, and it's going to fluctuate in between those limits. And what you're also saying is, please, you don't have to go to another website to get a little bit of a discount. So you don't have to go to a ticket discounter. You can have a discount on our website. And how to communicate it in the right way. Tell people that normally maybe it's 20 or 30 pounds, but right now, because it's raining, not a lot of people are coming in, you get a discount. Don't tell them, hey, normally it's 15 and now it's more popular, so you have to pay 30 bucks. Of course, nobody likes that. We all get negative reviews then. So the key is in communicating it well. And what we've seen is that we change, for example, variation in between the low and the popular days. And we change that up to around 20%. So you have a more even visitor spread. We have amazing cases where we have the revenue increase with almost 50%. And I'm not going to say this is for everybody, huh? Again, different parks, different algorithms, different outcomes. I really want to underline that for you guys. But yeah, over the years, we've been working with a lot of our partners, and approximately we've seen an increase in average ticket price of the 26%. So I think we're amazing results.
Thank you, Kimberly. That's really, really interesting to see how you can use AI to kind of absorb more data and provide a more interesting approach to dynamic pricing. And then it's just, how do you pitch it to the client?
For sure.
So let's just do a quick roundup, because I know we're coming to the end and there are a few questions already coming through. Let's just reiterate, optimize for mobile, because we know that most people have got most of their traffic coming via mobile. So get in there, test it, find out what your customers are experiencing, and improve the experience on mobile as much as you possibly can. We know that promotions and discounting can make a substantial difference to the number of sales and the average order value that you can achieve. So get in there and start testing what the impact of discounting can be. Please go and look at the sustainability of your website. Ask us for the data that we gathered about you. It may have changed. We can run it again and talk to you about what you need to do. But run some tests, discuss it with your digital team, make the small improvements that are necessary to improve the sustainability posture of your website. And whilst you're at it, look at the performance of your website, the speed that it downloads, because those two things are very much linked, but also the performance can have a massive improvement on your conversion rate if you speed your website up. That's it from me, Oz. With 15 minutes to land, we've got some Q&A.
We've got a few questions that we need to address. The first one is one that I can deal with, which is, will we be sharing the slide deck after the meeting? Somebody that was a little bit late to connect, and again, yes, we will. The slide deck is actually individual pages from the report document that we've drawn out and put together to create that. So at the end of this, obviously, you'll get a recording of everything that's been said today, but you'll also get an email with a link to view both the on-site presentation, so you can go through it, but also to download as a PDF as well. So you'll get much more information than you've had today in this webinar. The next one is, what's the response rate on a post-purchase customer questionnaire? And that's a really interesting one. So I'm going to throw that to Kim. I've got some thoughts, but I'm going to keep those until our resident expert has made her case.
Well, it depends a little bit what we've seen, because we are working with, as I said, an after payment form. So first you pay, then you come back to the website, of course, and then you get some questions. So this approximately for us gets an 80%, so that's really high. But that's because we directly push back to the information. If you're emailing and then sending something over, yeah, the response rates are a little bit or way lower there. Yeah, for sure.
I would imagine intuitively, though, that there's ways in which you can go about improving that. So I think that when you ask things after the transaction has taken place, you're in a demonstrably more trusting place between
Yes.
you and the customer, aren't you? But you can also do things to incentivize their increased interaction with you after the transaction. I know, stealing from the airlines, you will often get offered a cheap upgrade after the fact. After you've completed the transaction, you might be offered something as an incentive to engage with them further and manage your booking online. So there's little ways in which you can demonstrate real value to interacting with people, interacting with the attraction and the customer via email after the fact.
And there's an interesting point. I worked for a little while with the chap who set up Rackspace, one of the biggest hosting companies in the UK, and he became a business sales coach. And one of the things he always said, which seems to be a commonly held belief, is that customer satisfaction is at its highest the second you actually buy. And at that point, asking somebody a question is you vastly increase your chances of them actually putting the effort in to answer it. So maybe you've cut out some stages in your process, and then when they've hit buy, the payment's gone through, they immediately get a message with you saying, we'd love to email you a voucher for a free cup of coffee when you arrive on site. Can we, what's your email? Then suddenly you've got that data that you took out of the process before. So you both made the sale more likely and still managed to get the email so that you can retarget them later. So what's the response rate? I don't think anybody can give you a number, but I think we'd all agree that it's probably higher than pre-purchase.
Yeah. There's an interesting question from someone here about the use of AI and what impact it has on reducing your website's carbon footprint. That's a really interesting one, because the learning element of AI is particularly CO2 intensive. And so interacting with, for example, ChatGPT after the fact and asking it questions is not hugely computationally expensive, but teaching it, it can be computationally expensive, and consequently it consumes quite a lot of CO2. But if the use of the AI improves your conversion rate, then it's a difficult balance, isn't it? Because if it helps you to sell more stuff with less effort, then you may be wasting less CO2 on people that aren't buying from you. So
It's a really interesting debate, isn't it? Because clearly there's a trade-off here. There's a spectrum, and we all know that if your only focus is to reduce CO2 emissions, then you just switch your website off and close your attraction and go and sit on the sofa all day. But that's not actually what we're trying to do. And so there's got to be a line, and I think that only you in your business can make a decision as to what you consider to be an acceptable trade-off. But you can't do that until you've got the information in the first place. AI is a fascinating one, and I know that we are going to look at AI in some more detail later. I know, Paul, you're hoping to run a webinar on the use of AI specifically, because there are some really interesting things people are doing, and there's some things that in my former life working in a cloud provider have done with some very forward-thinking businesses that we might be able to look at moving across. Looking at using on-site CCTV to judge people's emotional state in different areas of a venue is perfectly possible. Yeah. Is it worth it? Who knows? But it's certainly a discussion that would be very interesting to have.
Have you got any other questions, mate?
We've got one from everybody's best friend, Andy Povey, can we give a comparison to the real world when talking about the amount of CO2 a website can generate? How much can it generate overall? I mean, it depends on your website, doesn't it? We know from the savings that we've achieved for a site recently that we mentioned that was a fraction of the CO2 that site generates. So
there are some real howlers in the database.
Yeah, really
of really badly performing websites where they are consuming disproportional amounts of CO2, and could resolve that really quite simply with a number of quick wins. They could move that dial really easily. So we're not talking trivial amounts of CO2 here. We are talking about something that is important, that everyone can do something about. As a marketer in an attraction, this is something that you can own and make a substantial difference to, and contribute to the sustainability goals of the wider organizations.
And I think we probably need to hold our hands up and say that we're just as complicit in this as everyone else, and we're undergoing exactly this process ourselves, and our new but completely identical in every way to anyone that looks at it website should be launching very soon. You shouldn't notice a difference, but it will have a significant difference on the amount of carbon that website generates. So it's a process that everybody probably should be thinking about going through. Absolutely. Do video heavy sites negatively impact CO2 emissions? Yes, absolutely. Video is massively more impactful when it comes to CO2 emissions than static imagery. Autoplay videos are probably the biggest damaging thing that we see on videos, and we've got one.
Yeah, we do have one. We won't have one much longer.
No.
But I think it is really hard to market and sell an in real life experience like an attraction without video. Video tells the story of what you're going to experience in such a powerful way. But can that video be optimized? Can it be compressed? Can it be squeezed so that it is consuming less bandwidth as it gets to the end user? And does it have to start automatically for every single user? The answer to that is an absolute no. If you turn it into something that somebody optionally engages with by pressing a play button, then you will make a substantial difference to the CO2 emissions of your site, but still be able to convey the in real life experience using the power of video.
For sure. And this is also something that is really good to test, because we've seen a few websites where videos have been used, but they were not good for conversion. So I would always say, even test it. Yeah, for sure. So please test it, because for me, this was new information on how the footprint is. And I would advocate even more on to please test it. Make sure if it's not working and your footprint increases, why use it?
Yeah,
It's nice.
completely.
And that, I think, you know, I'm gonna use that as a kind of a point to summarize from, and that is exactly the one thing. If you could take away nothing else from today's session, please look at what you're doing and test it.
100%.
By all means, come and talk to us, talk to Convius, look at the report, look at the statistics, use those as a baseline to judge what you're testing. But please, please, please base your marketing efforts on actual data, not just assumptions and this general knowledge that we all have that this must work because everybody does it.
Absolutely well said.
And with that, we are pretty much bang on an hour. So what's next?
I think, thank you, Kimberly. I've had lots of fun. It's been really good talking to you. There's so many things that you test and you know that give a counterintuitive view sometimes of what you might expect. So so it's really lovely doing this with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for making this awesome report.
Our pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Oz.
Well, thank you. Just before we go, if there's anybody still here, yeah, there's a few here. I just want to thank the wider team at Rubber Cheese because people have put a vast amount of work into this. Yeah. For the first time, we've done this whole thing in-house, and Wenelin especially has worked her fingers to the bone to get all of this information together. So thank you very much, and Matt as well. We need to mention Matt.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, hopefully, if you want to talk more, get in touch, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.